Hello guys, I'm back from another review and today we're talking about a brand new series called What If Deku Was the Only Boy with a quote-unquote quirk. So the reason why I decided to go for a quote-unquote quirk is because it's not technically a quirk. I guess you could say that. So, let us begin, shall we? So, in this world, back in the day, apparently men were a bit, asshole-ish. And then one day, this god by the name of Alaya, aka the god that basically rules over the Fate universe, please don't judge me that I decided to go for Fate once again. I just love Fate, okay? So, Fate, or more specifically, Alaya, would basically just see all of this as she would say, how would I make quirks then? Or at least, yeah, I should call them quirks. She would start to create quirks, which are basically the powers from My Hero Academia, and start chucking them at mostly girls to basically defend themselves. And so, quirks would start flourishing, mostly for girls, and unfortunately boys didn't really have that privilege at all. Mages would basically see all of this as the mages of the world, more specifically mostly boys and some, I guess you could say, quirkless girls, which were not affected by this, turn of events, would basically go away and never be seen again. Mostly the ones from the Mages Association, including the Clock Tower, what's the name of that, ocean thing? I can't remember the name. And also the ones from Trismegistus, or the Atlas Institution. So, they would basically escape, going into a different dimension. Don't even ask how that works, because this is the freaking Fate timeline, because I'm not going to ask about that. So, yeah, every single mage in this world would basically be gone. And so, quirks would basically start to flourish, and some of the girls would basically start to rule over the boys as kind of like dictators. Actually, not even kind of, more like actual dictators. They basically enslaved some of the boys, basically using them as nothing more than breeding stock. I'm not even kidding. So, Izuku would be born in this era of quote unquote peace. And when he does, he was also born with his twin sister, Izumi. She has a quirk which is similar to both Asashi and, Inko, which is pyrokinesis. Inko would be, a little bit nicer towards Izuku. After all, he is a boy, but Izumi would not care and start bullying him for being a boy. Asashi would also try, but one day, he would be killed during a little, fight against him and a, villain, which the villain would basically kill him. So yeah, Izuku's soul is basically gone at this point. So, Izuku would still keep enduring the bullying from, wait for a sec, from his twin sister, but he would also have a crush on this one girl, Bakugo Katsumi, aka just, Bakugo. Bakugo would be a girl in this one because obviously, as when he does confess to her during that one time in, um, yeah, middle school, she would basically obviously be, how do I say this, reject. Even though she does have a crush on him. The reason why she decided to do this is because she is a tsundere, and I'm not even kidding. So she would basically, beat him up, even bully him with Izumi, and Izumi and her would be best friends. Actually, it's more like a lackey and boss relationship than more than anything else. And if you don't know what I mean by this, well, Izumi is basically the lackey, and Bago is the boss. So, after Izuku getting his, dreams crushed, and not only that, his crush basically rejecting him, even beating him up for it, his eyes would basically start to glaze over. Instead of having that usual, anime shine, they're more like, just literal, just like glass eyes, literally emotionless. Izuku basically has several scars around his body because of all of the beatings that he had with his sister and Katsumi or Bakugo. His mother would always see them as she would always scold, always scold Izumi about bullying her, somewhat younger brother because technically she was the first one that basically was born or at least got out of the womb. So she was technically the older out of all of them, or both of them, or whatever. So she would basically never cared, and she would basically still bully Izuku. And for Inko, she would still try to cheer him up, even telling him that he could maybe become the first male hero, but he knows that it's never gonna happen. So one day he would basically be in a back alleyway as he would basically be attracted to a certain villain. A villain that would basically notice him and tries to, kill him. This villain was a girl obviously because in this world there's, only girls can have quirks as she would almost, kill him. But thankfully, a certain girl with blonde hair and a somewhat muscular figure would basically arrive. In this case, All Might. All Might would basically defend the boy and basically defeat the villain. So, she would basically give Izuku an autograph as Izuku would say this to her before she leaves. So, hey, All Might, as she would say this, what is this young boy? As she would say this, I meant he. As he would say, well, can I become a hero even though I'm a boy? As she would say this, in this almost somber tone. Sorry, kid. You can't become a hero. I mean, you're a boy and you don't have a quirk. So, she would basically jump away as Izuku would basically be saddened knowing this. Even though he already knows it, he felt a bit, angry at himself for being a boy. So, a few years have gone by as it's his last day of middle school. So, Izuku is currently walking down the, halls of the school as most little girls are basically throwing trash at him, even, throwing some of their quirks at him, which some of the, teachers would basically tell them to stop. So, the teacher would arrive at their class as some of the boys would basically notice her, which is a girl. The teacher is a girl, by the way, as she would say this. Alright, settle down, settle down. So, I know all of you girls want to become heroes, right? So, she would basically throw all of the papers in the sky as all of the girls would start, using all of their quirks, including Bakugo, aka, Izuku's used to be Crush, and Izumi. So, after the teacher says that, she would basically say that two people are apparently joining UA, and these people are. She would basically grab the papers as she would say Bakugo Katsumi and Izumi Midoriya, as all of the girls would start whispering, saying, yeah, I mean, that's obvious. I mean, they're pretty powerful. As you would start to whisper, when it's about time for them to go home now, Izuku would start packing his bags as Izumi would basically knock his papers away, including his notebooks and, other stuff. As she would say this, come on, let's go, you damn brat. As she would start to, snicker to herself, and Bakugo would basically see Izuku getting all of his stuff as she would basically stomp on his hand where he was about to get his final notebook. As she would say this, damn boy. She would basically snicker to herself as well, as Izuku would basically be angry. Izuku would already know that, that he's weak, that he's just a boy, and boys are meant to be quote unquote weak. So, he would grab all of his stuff as he would start going towards the roof instead of the entrance to the school or the exit. So, Izuku would be on the roof as he would put his bag and takes off his shoes. As he would say this, I'm I had enough. I'm done. As he would as Izuku would basically start to, write a letter saying that he's done living in this life of, torment and terror and enough of all of the suffering. So, after writing that little note, he would put it under his shoes as he would basically be at the ledge of the school roof. Izuku would remember one of one of the times when, what's her name? When Bakugo and Izumi were basically bullying him. As she would say this, specifically Izumi, "What? You damn little brat." As she would basically kick him right in the stomach, as she would start to use her, fire quirk to basically burn a part of his face. As she would say this, "How'd you go swan dive off the roof, brother?" Or actually, I don't really want to call you brother. After all, you are a boy. As she would start to laugh, as Bakugo would say this, "Yeah, maybe just go swan dive off the roof. Maybe you might become a girl in your next life." As she would start to laugh, as they would start to leave. Izuku would remember that vividly. Remember every single thing that they had done to him. As Izuku would say this, "So, this is the end for me, eh?" He would start to cry while also laughing maniacally as he would say this, "You're right. I'm nothing more than weak. I hope you're happy, Izumi." And Kachan, she would start to cry as Izuku would basically jump off the ledge. Seeing that he's going to fall and break all of his bones, he would start to remember even more. Remembering all of those bad times. Those girls ruined him. Those girls made him kill himself. As his body would flop down towards the ground, as every single person there would see the dead body, as all of the girls would scream, doing that casual, girly scream, as Izumi would look over and sees Izuku's dead body. She would be in shock, as she would say, "Wait, wait, Izuku?" As she would basically start to run over there, as she would say this, "Izuku, please!" As she would see that Izuku is basically dead. When Bakugo saw this, Bakugo would be horrified. She does have a crush on him, she would realize, and she would also realize that because of her actions, her only love, her crush, Izuku, it's all her fault. She basically killed him. She would start to cry as she would start to run away. As Izumi would notice this, as Izumi would say this, "Kachan, what are you doing?" As she would say this, "I'm going home." She would start to leave, as she would basically start to leave as well to basically get away from the crime scene. So, as every single student is basically around there, basically seeing the dead body, they would start to run away, including the teachers. They would start to call an ambulance. But before the ambulance came, a person up in the, roof of the school is basically watching all of this. This girl is wearing a cloak and seems to be wielding some sort of gigantic ass shield. The shield seems to be a shield that's also fused with a cross. She would basically stab the shield into the ground of the floor of the, wait for a second, floor of the roof, as she would say this, "So, he's the last member that I need to make. Berserker." She would basically jump down from the roof as this girl's, cloak, or more specifically the hoodie or hood, basically comes off of her. Her eyes, her eyes were, wait for a second, her eyes were a violet color, as her hair is pure pink, as she would say this, "Now, it's time for you to go, my final member." As she would basically grabs her, shield basically out of nowhere, almost like it's basically like flying towards her, almost like it has a mind of its own. It's like it has a consciousness. As she would basically grab the shield and grabs the boy, disappearing into a flashing bright light. As the ambulances would basically arrive, including some of the police, which were mostly girls, obviously, and some boys, they would see that the dead body of Izuku Midoriya was gone. As they would be confused, as all of the people there would basically start to explain that somebody basically came there and basically got the body of Izuku Midoriya. So, after getting the name, and also after the police would basically tell Inko Midoriya about it, she would start to cry. Both Izumi and, Bakugo would see this as both of them would start to feel guilt. They would start basically praying that Izuku would be, forgiving to them, maybe in their next lives or something. But let's go back to Izuku right now. So, Izuku is currently in some sort of test tube where this girl is basically watching over him, as she would basically start to look over and sees several other test tubes, more specifically, 6 more test tubes. Apparently, they were also boys, and they seemed to be wearing different types of clothing. Some of them even having armor, some of them even having almost similar quirks to, mutations or something like that. Some even having certain weapons. Like, for example, one of them seems to be wielding some sort of a spear, and the other seems to be wielding 2 swords. As she would start to look over and looks towards Izuku, as she would say this: "Now, my final member, the one that will bring forth a new generation. I want you to take everything. I want you to feel your anger, your rage, become what you were meant to be, the Berserker." As she would start to look over, as she would see several switches. These switches were also connected to large test tubes, and these test tubes seemed to be containing different items, more specifically 3 different items. One was a piece of a bone or something. It looks like a piece of bone that is completely black, like it's pure black, with several blood red lines basically aligning the bone, or the piece of bone, or more specifically the piece of bone, or whatever. As there seems to be another item there right beside it. It seems to be a piece of the round table, aka the round table of Camelot, aka, the Knights of the Round Table, aka King Arthur's Knights. And the final item seems to be a sharp knife that seems to be drenched in blood. More specifically, it seems to be drenched in blood so much that it turned blood red. As she would say this: "Now, come forth, Berserker." As she would basically pull on the lever, as several almost looming lights would basically start to appear, as they would start connecting towards, Izuku. As Izuku would be pulsed, or more like awakened from that light, as his body would start to change, his eyes would one of his eyes would start to turn a blood red, as 2 almost warlike tattoos would basically be on his face. Mostly 2. As his body would also start to change, one of his arms would start to turn into a similar substance to that bone-like, piece. As it starts to grow into a large claw, as these claws that are basically connected to that, part, seem to be blood red and seem to resemble blades. As it will start to he would start to gain armor, more specifically in his legs and, other arm. As his face would start to become covered in that similar armor. As he would start to gain a knight-like, helmet with a large unicorn-like horn and a, piece of how do I say this? A piece of blue cloth, basically, there in the back, basically acting like a, typical, knight, feather thing, or whatever it's called. I don't really know what to call it. He's also wearing a simple suit for some odd reason. So, as after the transformation, something seems to be glowing in one of his hands, or more specifically, the armored-like hands. And this glowing mark seems to be a command seal? As she would say this: "Yes, yes." As she would start to look at her, hand, the same hand that is similar to Izuku's, the same placement as, Izuku's, command spell, as she would see the same command spell in her hand as well. As she would say this: "Now, I finally have them all." Now, come forth, Saber. As the two, or more specifically, um, wait for a second, the sword dual wielding man would basically burst out of his, test tube as he would say this. What is it, master? As she would say this. Come forth, archer. As a man seems to be wielding a bow and arrow, as he would basically come out of the glass, as she would say this. I meant he. What is it, master? As she would say this. Come forth, lancer, rider. As two people would basically burst out. One of them seems to be a man wielding a red and golden spear, and the other seems to be a man with several, more specifically, several mutations around his body. More specifically, one side of his body. One side seems to resemble almost woolly mammoth type qualities, with several shards of ice basically come out of him. He also seems to be wielding some sort of staff, and the other, in his other hand, seems to be wielding some sort of sword or spear or whatever. You basically get it. As he would say this, what is it, master? Both of them would basically say, as she would say this, come forth, assassin, caster. As several of them, more specifically two of them, would basically come out. One of them seems to be wearing a skull-like mask and wearing a cloak. And he seems to be wielding a large katana. The other seems to be a man. Also man, you basically get it. As he seems to be wielding some sort of book and seems to have a weird ass face. More specifically, he seems to have bug-like eyes. Not in the, insectile like eyes, more like the, his eyes are basically just like, one eye is basically facing another way and the other one is facing another way. And he also seems to be, how do we say this? As a large golem would basically be on top of him. Not really on top of him, more like he's riding on the golem. As he would say this. Yes, master. As she would say this. And now, come forth, Berserker. She would basically say this. As Izuku, now known as Berserker, would basically burst out of his test tube. As he would say this. Arthur! As he would start to scream out, with his voice being modulated. What do I mean by this? Well, he seems to have some sort of voice changer in his mask. As she would say this. Now, all of you are finally awake. Now, let us start our revenge. She would start to laugh, as all of them would start to laugh as well. Except for Izuku. He would be screaming out saying, Arthur must murder. Give me blood. As this is going to be the end of this episode. So, how do you like this episode? So, yeah, anyway, so, I hope you liked the video, comment, and subscribe, and I hope to see you guys next time. Bye-bye!